Hey, what's up? It's your boy Rawk. I've got to tell you, I've always wanted to be like THQ. They've been such an inspiration to my life. Ever since I was a little kid, I remember telling my parents about how I want to be just like THQ. Could you imagine a world without you in it? Klaim and I can't. Because we don't have to. Video game development is an incredibly expensive process. Typically, studios end up spending millions in order to create a modern game, so when those games don't end up selling all too well, it might be time to start sizing up a coffin. Nobody likes to see a game studio shut down, but when they're failing to make enough money to stay in the race, it's an inevitability. Incredibly unfortunate, but still inevitable. So, now that I'm dead, why not take a look at a handful of companies that share that title, and see if we can determine how and why they ended up succumbing to the same fate I did. You know, just once, it would be nice to die and just be dead. Go to hell or something. Anyway, there's no possible way I can talk about every single video game company that's ever gone defunct, so instead, I'm just gonna focus on a few of the more notable ones, starting with the fuckers who got me here to begin with. THQ was something of an infamous name in the gaming industry for a good while there, mostly known for publishing and distributing a wide number of games of a more questionable quality. The titles under their belt include such gems as Cars Racer-Rama, SpongeBob Truth or Square, Wheel of Fortune on Wii. They did have a couple of notable franchises under their belts at one point in time or another, such as Metro and Darksiders, and a lot of people look back on their releases fondly. THQ filed for bankruptcy in early 2013, after suffering some major financial hardships in the few years prior. One might assume that a lot of this had to do with their abundance of licensed kids games that tended to be mediocre at best, and failed to really sell all that well, but the company was making a conscious effort to steer away from those releases as early as January 2012. However, that wasn't before the release of one final kid-focused product that many people believe caused the downfall of THQ. Introducing what I like to call the Pre-U. The U-Draw tablet is honestly worthy of its own entire discussion, but for the time being, this thing was essentially a drawing tablet, initially released for the Nintendo Wii alongside a number of compatible games featuring established kid-friendly franchises like SpongeBob and Kung Fu Panda. This thing wasn't received all too well by grown men in suits and ties who have mortgages and car insurances to worry about, and the thing tanked financially. THQ's solution to this? Release it again, damn it! They tried to release this thing for both the Xbox 360 and PS3, consoles that, unlike the Nintendo Wii, didn't hugely appeal to the general audiences who would be interested in a device that can play SpongeBob SquigglePants. If this thing flopped on the Wii, it bombed on these two platforms. And that, combined with a string of notable games that were met with poor reception and underwhelming sales, led to THQ's assets being auctioned off, and the company went defunct. This was a shame to see, especially seeing as there wasn't one big issue that caused their downfall, but rather a big number of smaller issues. But that's not the end of THQ's story, as they ended up being acquired by Nordic Games to form THQ Nordic, and they've continued to release games ever since. While we're on the topic of publishing powerhouses with an iffy track record, let's talk about Klaim. One of the biggest, most well-known publishers outside of the big three for a good while there, publishing things like the Rawk games, a few NBA Jams, and the NES version of Othello. Truly, they were a titan of the gaming industry at the time. Klaim filed for bankruptcy in 2004 after suffering major financial hardships the same year, and much like THQ, I don't think there was one major issue they faced that led them towards their grave, but rather, the games they were making just weren't good enough to survive in the ever-evolving landscape of gaming. Back in the days of the NES, and to some extent the SNES and N64, releasing something that was kinda middle of the road in terms of quality wasn't that big a deal. But when expectations of a game's quality began to rise in the coming generations, the quality of what Acclaim were making failed to rise with them. Let's wrap up this trilogy of terrible with Data Design Interactive. I wonder why they went bankrupt. Data Design Interactive is one of the single worst game studios out there. Starting off their life porting games to other systems here and there and making the odd original title, Data Design ended up finding their groove around the PS2 to Wii era. They would make a cheap, short, low-effort, low-budget game, release it, then release it again. Then release it again. They flooded the market with reskins of previous games they'd made, the most noteworthy offenders being Ninja Breadman, Anubis II, and Mythmaker Trixie in Toyland, which are all the exact same 3D platformer that was pretty terrible the first time around. But the thing is, this tactic worked. Sure, these games were all the exact same thing, but there was really no way to know until you'd already bought them, at which point, they'd already won. And these games would always be priced at around £20, making them seem like no-brainers to add to any Wii collection, especially for families. But this practice did eventually catch up to them, and in 2012, they went defunct, which is definitely because the word quality didn't appear once in their mission statement. It's a shame, but with the absolute state of their lineup after the Wii generation was all said and done, I'd argue this was for the best. And it led to the only funeral I've ever been to where the generally accepted response was applause. LucasArts was the studio behind all of the games that stemmed from the properties of Lucasfilm, i.e. Star Wars. They do have a fair number of other franchises and properties under their belt, but just like Lucasfilm, LucasArts' main focus was the multimedia cash cow of Star Wars, so a large portion of their published works are video game adaptations of that franchise. They were making games quite contently from the late 80s all the way up until the early 2010s, until Disney stepped in 2012 and bought Lucasfilm and all of its subsidiaries for over $4 billion. As a part of this, LucasArts were scooped up, and the plan was business as usual. LucasArts were going to continue working on their games, such as Star Wars 1313, and all would be right in the world. But then, in April 2013, it was announced that LucasArts would be closing its doors, leaving all current projects and hundreds of employees out in the cold. This absolutely stunk. This closure felt like it came out of nowhere and saw so many people left without jobs. And at least from where I'm sitting, that didn't seem justified. LucasArts had been doing fine before they were bought out by Disney. I don't think any of their games took the world by storm, but they were managing to get by. Now, as of 2021, LucasArts is back in action, but they're no longer developing and publishing the games based on their properties, and are instead licensing their properties to other studios. So while they technically aren't defunct anymore, what they're doing now is so far removed from what they'd been doing in the past. So I think it's fair to say that the LucasArts we once knew is no more. After LucasArts' closure, Disney was sure to reassure everybody that their video games would continue to be developed and released, and would be handled solely by Disney Interactive Studios. Speaking of which, Disney Interactive Studios was your go-to developer for games based on Disney IP. Pretty much every game they made was a tie-in to a recent theatrical release, and in terms of quality, it's rude to mock the deceased. They made games for such a wide variety of properties, especially after the LucasArts acquisition. But in 2013, a little game called Disney Infinity released, and would forever change the company's course. Disney Infinity capitalized on the Toys to Life craze, initiated by Skylanders a couple of years prior, and instead of being based on one single Disney IP, this game brought together a whole bunch of characters from all across their pool of properties. This gave the game mass appeal, which combined with the figures that were sold separately and were integral to the game's enjoyability, allowed this game to make Disney bank. Disney Infinity was more profitable than arguably any of the games they'd released prior, and other than the production of the toys, it probably cost them less to make. So it makes sense that the company would begin to lean into this idea as the years went on. From 2013 to 2015, there was a new Disney Infinity release every year, with a big batch of new toys to coincide with it, and the company was gearing up for Disney Infinity 4.0. But by 2016, it was clear that the Toys to Life idea had long since passed its cultural sell-by date. There was just no interest in buying toys to use in video games anymore. So Disney shut down Disney Interactive Studios in May of 2016. This is a pretty cut and dry case. They put all of their eggs in one basket, and that basket had an execution date scheduled. It was only a matter of time before this tactic tanked. But with there being plans for a Disney Infinity 4.0, this definitely seems like a move that the company weren't expecting. If we want to talk about studios who put all their eggs in one basket, it's impossible not to talk about Telltale Games, one of the most highly revered developers of the 2010s, seeing their initial boom in popularity after releasing their Walking Dead game, based on the Walking Dead comic series that had recently seen a huge resurgence in popularity thanks to the TV adaptation. The Walking Dead was a story-driven adventure game, what some would refer to as a point-and-click. But what set Telltale's approach apart from any other games in this genre at the time was the fact that this game heavily focused on a choice-based system. This meant that basically every playthrough was entirely unique. And for games in series like The Walking Dead, the story that you influenced could carry on into the next installment. It was a winning formula and clearly resonated with audiences, so the company did what I think any other would do and tried to capitalize on this success. They kept pumping out game after game after game in this style, collaborating with Minecraft, Game of Thrones, Batman, Guardians of the Galaxy. It seemed like they were on top of the world. But internally, things weren't quite going right, as them churning out as many of these games as possible led to a crunch culture in the company, meaning that the developers were working way more than they ever should have been just to meet deadlines. And on top of hindering any sort of quality of life for these developers, it also hindered their creativity. It was clear that something needed to change over at Telltale. So in 2017, there was an attempt to restructure the company in order to fix its problems. But by that point, the writing was already on the wall. During the production of the final season of The Walking Dead, the company closed its doors. A few employees were kept on to wrap up standing obligations, but once that was taken care of, Telltale went fully defunct in October that same year. The story of Telltale Games is a really sad one, seeing a company find success after years of trying, only to get swept up in trying to meet the brutal demands and expectations of the industry, leading to their closure. It's really upsetting. If given the time to innovate and evolve their games without sacrificing the well-being of their employees, I think Telltale would still be going strong to this day. But in trying to continue the momentum of their success, they just ended up sowing the seeds to their downfall. Oh, Alpha Dream. Poor, sweet Alpha Dream. Alpha Dream were a smaller development team that made games pretty much exclusively for Nintendo consoles, and really hit it big when they partnered with Nintendo to create Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, an absolutely fantastic RPG in the Mario universe that's so wholly unique and full of charm, and more importantly, was adored by millions of fans all over the world. Mario & Luigi was the success that Alpha Dream needed, and much like the previous two studios I've talked about, they did their best to try and capitalize on it. They had a fairly steady stream of more original titles throughout the 2000s, most notably the Hamtaro series of games, but by the 2010s, Mario & Luigi was their only output. However, while Mario & Luigi was their sole focus, fans started to notice a drop-off in quality compared to the previous titles in the series. Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story put the series at an all-time high, but it never really managed to maintain that quality with the following entries. In 2013, they released Mario & Luigi Dream Team, a game that many people enjoy, don't get me wrong, but one that lacked a lot of the charm of the previous 3 games. Then in 2015, the series hit an all-time low with Mario & Luigi Paper Jam, a crossover with Paper Mario, another Mario RPG series whose creativity and charm was dwindling with every passing day. And Paper Jam managed to take the most watered down, bland, and boring elements from both of these series and fuse them together for an adventure of mediocrity. The concept of these 2 series crossing over had almost too much potential, and they absolutely fumbled the execution. So perhaps in an attempt to rediscover what made the series beloved in the first place, they went back and remade Superstar Saga for the 3DS in 2017. An interesting move to say the least, as the Nintendo Switch was taking the world by storm at that point. But the 3DS couldn't play Superstar Saga at the time, so it at least felt justified to put it on the platform. The game was arguably inferior to the original in a lot of ways, but it still had its charm. But then, Alpha Dream began development of what I would consider to be the final nail in their coffin: Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey. Another Mario & Luigi remake, this game released on the 3DS, not the Switch, in 2019, after being revealed a year prior. And unlike Superstar Saga, Bowser's Inside Story could already be played on the 3DS thanks to its backwards compatibility, which made this a completely pointless release to many. The thing tanked, and is one of the single worst selling products to bear the Mario branding, and not long after its release, Alpha Dream declared bankruptcy and shut its doors for good. It's pretty clear why this happened. They simply failed to realize that putting all of their development power into remaking a game for a dead platform that could already play said game wouldn't be a wise move to make. But I will say, even back when they were at their best, Nintendo never made any sort of attempt to buy out Alpha Dream. When things started to go south for them, sure, I understand not wanting to buy them. They were massively in debt and were failing to turn a profit with any of their projects. But a buyout earlier in their history could have helped prevent that. Not saying it definitely would have, but it's worth thinking about. Vanpool is a really interesting company to me, or rather, was a really interesting company to me. It wasn't very often that they developed a game entirely on their own, but they had a hand in a pretty respectable number of projects, working almost exclusively with Nintendo. They developed the Dylan's Rolling Western games on the 3DS, which was pretty much their flagship series, but as far back as Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, they've been assisting in the development of a lot of Nintendo games. They made a minigame in Wii Play Motion, they helped with the direction and script of Paper Mario Sticker Star, they co-developed Chibi Robo Ziplash. Yeah, that probably has something to do with their closure. Alright, they had their hand in some f***ing atrocious games and Wii Play Motion, but in the Nintendo Switch era, they turned things around and co-developed all of the Kirby games that were coming out from 2019 and beyond. Most notably, they co-developed 2022's Kirby and the Forgotten Land and 2023's Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, 2 stellar entries in the franchise. But not too long after the release of Return to Dreamland Deluxe, in May of 2023, Vanpool went defunct, and I legitimately do not know why. I'm serious. I mean, they probably weren't raking in huge profits from their work on the Kirby lineup, as I assume the majority of the work was done by HAL Laboratory, but Forgotten Land was wildly successful. Surely that would warrant remaining open at least to some extent. I think again, the problem here was that they weren't owned by Nintendo. They were an independent studio with a strong partnership, but that partnership clearly wasn't enough to keep their heads above water. The final company I'd like to discuss is in something of a limbo. Not officially defunct, but completely off the grid and have been for a number of years. I'm of course talking about the creators of my ever-beloved chibi robo, Skip Limited. The last time Skip released a game was in 2015 with Chibi Robo Ziplash, and honestly, yeah, if I released this thing, I'd also go off the grid for 8 years. It was feasible that the company were working on something in the background, which would explain their absence, but in 2020, things started to look more and more uncertain for the fate of this studio. It started to come to people's attention that Skip's website no longer existed. Their Tokyo office was no longer theirs, and their CEO, Hiroshi Suzuki, removed any mention of the company from his social media platforms. The last time Skip officially appeared in any way was with Chibi Robo's Spirit in Smash Bros. Ultimate. By all accounts, Skip Limited is no longer a corporate entity. And while the fate of this company seems to be up in the air, it's widely believed that a lot of Skip's development staff jumped ship over to Vanpool sometime after the critical and commercial failure of Chibi Robo Ziplash. And with Vanpool now officially defunct, it stands to reason that Skip would be too.
It really is a shame to see these companies bite the dust, and even more of a shame to think about the talented people at those companies that were left without a job. And from a fan's perspective, while we may get another Disney tie-in game, or Mario & Luigi game, or Chibi Robo game, it's likely that they won't be from the same creative minds that brought us these games to begin with, and they might not be as good. But hey, there is still hope. I mean, THQ is still releasing games to this very day. So you can't get rid of me forever, bitch!